Welcome to part 3. We're going to expand on our saving and loading system. And what we're going to do is make it to where the game will save however many enemies are in the game. And then, of course, load those enemies, their X, their Y, as well as their hit points. So we can add some damage to their hit points now. And, of course, we already have it from part 1 and 2, where it saves our X and Y. And, of course, the room we're in and all of that good stuff. But let's go ahead and save the game. Let's go ahead and restart the game and load it. And you're going to see our enemies are back on the screen with however many hit points they had. And this will be the fundamentals to do this for not just enemies, but anything you want to save along with your player. So let's go ahead and use this project here. This is about as it was when we left off. Of course, I added enemies, and I'm not going to go through all of that. But let's go ahead and make some tweaks here. In part 2, I think it was, the last video, we had it to where our load game script set an alarm to 0, and then it detected if the player's in the game, then run this code. Change this. I don't know why I did it this way, but change it to room start, because that just makes so much more sense, because that's what we're doing anyway. When the game starts, we set a small alarm to do that. I don't know why we did it that way. Just set it to where to room start in object game save. Go to your load game script and just get rid of this alarm, because that just was very unnecessary. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is open up our save game script, and I just want to make sure everything kind of looks good here, and yeah, I guess we'll do it right about here. So the first thing we want to do is detect how many enemies are actually on the screen. So we're going to say var enemy count equals instance number object enemy, right? And I'll make this a little bigger so you can see better. There we go. Okay, so first thing we want to do, we want how many enemies are on the screen, then we want to write that into our buffer. So buffer write, buffer, we could do a U8. If you think there's going to be more than 255 enemies, you can do a U16, doesn't really matter. Enemy count. So we're just storing however many enemies there are in this buffer, that's going to then, of course, save it. Okay, moving on from that, we're probably going to need to do a loop. We're going to need to do something. But I guess we'll just do it this way. This might not be the best way, but this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to make a list. So enemy list, ds list create, and we're going to say with object enemy, we're just going to say ds list add to enemy list your ID. So we're getting the instance ID of all the enemies in the room, and it's going to add it to this ds list, and we're going to use that in our for loop. So we're going to say for var I equals 0 if I is less than enemy count, which is how many enemies are on the screen, then we're going to increment I by 1. Okay, there's our for loop. Pretty sweet. Now, basically what we're going to do is with this for loop is save however many enemies there are. We're going to save their X and their Y, and we're going to load this in the same order that we're saving it in, with a for loop in the load script. If you don't understand for loops, I'll have a video out for that soon, and we'll put that in the description, and you can go check that out. But it's just looping. We're going to say var enemy equals ds list find value enemy list I. So we're going to cycle through this entire list, get the IDs of the enemy, and then we're going to write their X and their Y, and we'll just do it that way. So buffer write buffer, so it's the name of our buffer that we created way up here, buffer, and we'll do buffer F32 enemy.x. All right, I'm just going to copy paste that and save our Y as well. I'll just copy and paste it again. Change this to a buffer U8 for their hit points, because we're not going to go past 255 hit points. If you are, don't use a U8. Use something else. That's pretty much all you got to do for the saving, because we're just detecting however many enemies there are. Save all that data however many times enemies there be. Yes, I am very articulate. Me smart. Okay, so that's your saving. That's all you got to do is add that code. Now let's go to our load game, and let's go ahead and code this in as well. So let's see here. Where are we going to want to put this? I just want to make sure everything looks good. We don't need to change anything since I was looking at this yesterday. Okay, so definitely before delete. So again, this might not be the greatest way to do it. You can tweak it to your needs, but we're going to say var enemy count equals buffer read now. Buffer, what did we use? I think we used a buffer U16 for the enemy count. So there we go. So of course, we're getting in order our X, Y, hit points, all that for the player. And this is now going to utilize these variables in room start of game save. But also, yeah, so we're now going to get however many enemies there were when we save the game. And I guess the next thing we're going to have to do is create an array. So enemy X array equals array create enemy count. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy paste that because we're doing Y and we're also going to do hit points. And so we're going to create an array for however, the size of the array is the size of however many enemies were saved in the game. Okay, now our wonderful for loops. Var I equals 0. If I is less than enemy count, then increment I by 1. Nice. Oops. Change that. Okay, and put this enemy X array. Of course, it is an array now, so we say I equals buffer read buffer F32. Copy paste. Change that to Y. Change that to HP, and of course our HP is not an F32, it is a U8. Bam. Okay, yeah, it's starting to look good. This is basically all you need to do. I think this is probably this is basically it. So again, you're just getting the amount of enemies. You're creating these arrays. And those arrays, I'll show you what we're going to do with these arrays here in a second. But we're essentially storing all the X's and the Y's and the HPs of all the enemies in this wonderful array. And then we're going to go to object game save. We're going to go to our room start here, and we're going to expand now on this script. So one thing I actually want to do is in your create event, which I already have it made here because I already did a practice run of this, add this variable into your project in the create event of your game save. Global is loading game equals false. This is very important because you need to, obviously this is going to run when room starts, and this is a persistent object. So if you start a new game, it's going to try to run the script, and it's not going to be good because it's not loading a game. So you're going to get errors. So we're gonna wrap this in if global.isLoading game equals true. Go ahead and wrap everything in here. And then I'm going to go back to our load game. Sorry if I'm all over the place, but I just remembered that. And just before we go to the room, we're going to say global.isLoading game equals true. So it's set to false by default, but if we run load game, it's going to say, okay, this variable is true. And then when the room starts, we know that we're going to run this loading game code. Okay, now we just need to spawn our enemies in. So let's do that. Let's see here. Oh, I'm going to use a piece of code that I still don't, it's not in my, not deep within my brain here. It's still a new code for me. If variable instance exists. It's just checking if a variable exists. ID enemy X array. So, if it's loading, obviously it created this variable in the load game. We created that array, but this checks if it actually exists. And yeah, so with object enemy destroy. Oops, instance. Oh my gosh. Destroy. Okay. So basically, if we're loading a game and we're going into a room and there's already enemies there, it's going to destroy any enemy that's there and then recreate new enemies, which is very important because you don't want enemies to load on top of enemies in your room. And that's what this is doing. It's checking Does this variable exist? And if it does, destroy all the enemies in this room before we create brand new enemies. So that's what that's all about. Okay? Which that's a cool function, by the way. I always forget that exists. You can check that. Now, we want to make a for loop. So we're going to say for variable I equals 0, semicolon. If I is less than array length. See, we can just check how big this array is. X. We're going to use this one again. We could use any of the arrays, but we'll just use this one. Increment I by 1. You're going to get an error here because we're not creating this in the create event. Because this code is not going to run unless we're loading a game. And if we're loading a game, then we're creating this variable. And we need to create it later because of this right here. Like I said, probably is not the best way to do it, but it works. So, don't dislike the video. I'm trying my best. Okay, var enemy equals instance. I'm sorry I can't type. Create layer. Holy cow. Okay, I just need to slow way down. So you you can use create layer or create depth, whatever you want to do. But we're gonna say, we'll just do it this way. Enemy X array I. Okay, enemy Y array I. All right. So we're obviously we're not done. Instances, and then object enemy. Okay. So obviously here's what we're doing is we're cycling through everything. We're cycling through however many enemies there are. That number is going to be reflected in the array, any one of those arrays that we created. So it's going to run that many times. And however many times that runs, it's going to instance create that object. And I know I laid it out kind of funny here, but that's just so you can see it. So it's not a big, it's not all like this. But essentially, you're giving it just like an instance create function. It's X position, it's Y position, the layer it's in, and then the object. So obviously, we created an array that contains the X position, and it's going to go in that order that it loaded in. And, that's just it. It works. It does work. So it's just spawning these enemies, and this gives us our X and our Y positions for those enemies as it's being created. And then we want to say enemy, because we're storing the ID that we've created, right? Sorry, pet peeve. We're storing the instance ID within this variable. We want to say enemy.hitpoints equals enemy HP array I. Boom. And of course, if you want to, you can clean up your arrays too, so they're just not taking memory space by just saying enemy X array equals -1. And then you could do that for all the arrays we made. And that will work. That should work, at least. One thing I want to do is I want to move this. Because I just realized here. I want to move this over here. So I'm going to wrap. I'm wrapping everything within this if this array even exists. Because otherwise, if there's no enemies in a room and we try to create enemies, we're just going to run into issues. So I took this variable instance exists and I wrapped this for loop in it as well. So we destroy all the enemies. Here's our original code. But now we're going to spawn enemies. So if we have an array created, that means we have enemies. Destroy all enemies in the room. Run this for loop, which is going to run as many times as however many enemies there are. Create the enemies, take the hit points, clear the arrays, snap the wrist, walk away. That's it. Should work just fine. Famous last words, but all right, new game. Let's spawn some enemies in, and let's damage their health. Let's damage my health. Let's click F5. You've saved the game. I'm going to restart the game, load the game. Boom! Works wonderfully. So that's it. And this is the fundamental of doing this for any object in the game. So if you have anything, if you have, I don't know, I'm trying to think, other NPCs that walk around, or if you have different items, if you have anything in the game, power-ups that are in certain locations, if you have, the player can make a base and move walls around, move furniture around, you just do it like this. you use for loops. You get the count of how many enemies or objects there are that you want to save, run a for loop that many times, taking the variables that you want. And then you load that in the same order using the same method, and then you create it using that same method of running this for loop. And I'm joking about this not being the best way. There is no best way. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So don't look for the best possible way all the time. There's the one that's going to work best for you. And so I encourage you to take the code that I've showed you today and do something with it. Make it your own. And I hope this video helped. If you want me to expand on it even more, I can. But I don't know. I think we've basically covered it. And yeah, see that if we load the game while we're in the game, see how it'll actually let's just check to make sure it's destroying enemies real quick. By the way, the video is basically over. But now I'm just curious. If I throw enemies in advance and I have a new game, so the enemy's already there, then I load the game. Okay, yeah, it works. So it deletes all the enemies as it should. New game. All right, it all works. Thank you for watching. If you want me to expand on it, leave a comment. Thank you for subscribing. Follow me on x.com/Wizardy, and I'll see you over there. Also, my Discord is in the description of this video.